The Guardian.
Welcome to Science Weekly. The team returns next week, but while they're away, we're continuing to revisit some of our favourite episodes from the archive. Over the past 3 weeks, we've been listening to the extraordinary sounds of the ocean. And in this episode, which was first broadcast in June 2018, we're climbing back onto land to hear the work of sound ecologist Dr. Bernie Krause.
Soundscape ecology in the simplest form is the study of sound in the landscape or the seascape. And the value of this material is what the planet sounds like, because we can make a determination from listening to very short pieces of these soundscapes, 15 seconds. We can tell whether a habitat is healthy or whether it's under stress. And in some cases, we can tell what the reasons for that compromise in a habitat or the health of a habitat is.
Science Weekly will return with all new episodes from Friday the 6th of September. But for now, enjoy this episode as Ian Sample speaks to one of the pioneers in the field about his life in sound.
Hello.
Hi, Bernie.
Hello, Ian. How are you?
Fantastic. It's a real pleasure to have you on.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to be here, and The Guardian is one of our favorite...
This is Dr. Bernie Krause. He's a soundscape ecologist.
Which means I go around the world and record natural soundscapes. And I do this because I think really just the sounds themselves are very reassuring to me. And I've always been drawn to them from the time I was very young. I was a bit challenged with a very bad case of ADHD. I grew up in Detroit, and for punishment, my parents would send me to my tiny room in the back of our small house. And it was an area that was just being developed. It was typically farmland, and it was part of the Wisconsin Glacier. So it was almost, the land, most of it was still viable. And in the spring and summer months, from the perspective of my small room, I throw open the windows and calm myself to the rhythms of the crickets and the dawn and evening choruses of birds. It included all kinds of things, mourning doves and pheasants, cardinals, wood warblers, and things like that. And I learned then that those were the types of nurturing sounds that made me feel good.
So the environment and ecology was always a big deal for you?
Yeah, it was, because it was the only thing that helped me, and this made a big difference.
What got you into recording the sounds of nature?
Well, I was recording an album during my music days. The album was called In a Wild Sanctuary, and it was for Warner Brothers. And I did this album with my late music partner, Paul Beaver, and we needed sounds for a number of cuts that required natural sound. And since the album was the first on the theme of ecology, off I went into a local park, not very far from San Francisco, and recorded the late October afternoon ambience. And when I turned on that recorder and heard the sound through my earphones, I said, "My God, this is the loveliest stuff I've ever heard." And so I was just blown away when I heard it the first time. It brought back all those calming memories from my early childhood. And I made up my mind right then and there that I wasn't going to let that feeling of serenity ever escape again.
Until that point, Bernie had worked in the music and movie industry, recording sessions with the Monkees, the Doors and Stevie Wonder, as well as composing music for films like Apocalypse Now.
I was a fairly successful musician. We had done lots of dates. We'd done 135 feature films by then. We'd done a lot of albums and recording with other artists. It just wasn't a very satisfying life for me, always being inside and always working in a studio. And so from my perspective, I just wanted to be out. in the wild because it made me feel good. And that was what drew me to it. I had no idea what this would turn into.
Bernie did a PhD in sound and bioacoustics and went on to be one of the founders of Soundscape ecology, that is, the study of nature through sound. For 50 years he has travelled the world armed with little more than a microphone and recorder, and so it's no surprise that he has some remarkable stories to tell.
I was recording north of Manaus in the middle of Brazil, and I was with my colleague from Harvard, Ruth Happel, and we decided to go out one night to see if we could get some recordings of the early morning, like just after midnight, soundscapes. And we were walking down the trail, and we smelled this marking scent of a jaguar that we knew was nearby, but we didn't want to startle it with our torches. But it kept following us down this trail several kilometers. Finally, at one point, we decided to go off in different directions and record to get the widest variety of natural soundscapes that we could. And so Ruth went off in one direction, I went off in another. But I got to a place where I set up my equipment. I have a 10-meter cable, and so the cable was at one end, and I was sitting in this tripod chair, and all of a sudden, this jaguar came up to the mic and literally began to vocalize like a pop singer. I didn't think very much of it. I mean, my heart was beating pretty fast, I can tell you, but finally it just stopped and went away and loped off into the forest.
Were you scared?
No, I wasn't scared because I figured if it wanted to get us, it had plenty of opportunity before then. And so I just figured it was just tracking. No, I really wasn't. Maybe I was too stupid, I don't know.
There was also a time that Bernie saved a humpback whale.
That was the fall of 1985, and a humpback whale was reported then in San Francisco Bay.
Dubbed Humphrey, the humpback whale had swum 55 miles upriver. Officials had tried a number of tactics, like trying to chase it back out to sea with boats, but nothing had worked, until Bernie came along armed with a sound file he had borrowed off some students at Hawaii University.
That they'd made of humpbacks lunge feeding and the subsequent contact calls that occur after they go through this feeding process. I took that tape because it was a terrible tape. It had a lot of noise on it, and it was only one example of the whale sound. And I processed it multiple ways so that the animal wouldn't become habituated to the sounds when we played it back in the river for it. And when I played those sounds, the whale followed our boat 49 miles in 7 hours to San Francisco Bay. And the following day, it was herded out to the Pacific Ocean.
But if he had to go down memory lane and pick the place that most sticks out in his mind, it would be Alaska.
Which, until recently, with the advance of global warming consequences, was one of the most stunning land areas on the planet. And it was replete with thousands of different habitats, both marine and terrestrial. Like, for instance, it's loaded with temperate rainforests, mountains, glaciers, boreal forest, coastal regions, multiple Arctic and subarctic habitats, and best of all, there's only about 750,000 people in an area maybe 3 times larger than France. And it's a place with areas like, for instance, the Yukon Delta Refuge, where literally millions of the world's birds migrate during the short subarctic spring and summer, flying from as far away as Africa and New Zealand to nest and breed in this one small area. And the biophony, the collective sound that they all make in this one place, is absolutely spectacular. We know so little about the sounds of the natural world, and I was just walking along and came across this tide pool, which was filled with these beautifully colored anemones. And I thought to myself, geez, I wonder if they make any sound. So I have a hydrophone, which is an underwater microphone with the head covered in neoprene. And I dropped the hydrophone down the mouth part, which is the center part of the anemone, and the tentacles wrapped around it, searching out the surface for anything of nutritional value. And when they didn't find it, this anemone kind of gave this huge burp, and which is a sound I'd never heard before, and expelled the hydrophone. And I have one of the few examples of an anemone actually expressing itself.
Have you ever been surprised at other noises that other animals have made?
Oh, sure. I have recordings of insect larvae. A colleague recorded viruses. So these are, and people don't think of them as making noise or being particularly vocal, but they express themselves acoustically. And it's amazing what kind of variety of sounds is out there. Ants make noise, they sing.
Bernie has now recorded over 5,000 hours worth of nature and 15,000 individual species. In fact, he has one of the oldest audio catalogues around. What is dramatic is how the soundscapes in different places change over time. They lose their richness. Some have fallen silent.